Governor, we'll come to today's decision around rates in a moment. If I may, I'd like to start with the revelations about Peter Mandelson's conduct as business secretary, his communication with Jeffrey Epstein, the apparent sharing of deeply sensitive, market-sensitive information at the height of the response to the financial crash. You were here at the Bank of England at the time. You had a front row seat. What was your response to hearing those revelations?
Well, I'm deeply concerned. We have very, very strong laws and regulations around obviously market-sensitive information for very good reasons. I mean, this is extremely sensitive, and I must say it is very concerning to hear this news. Now, look, it's appropriately being investigated, and it's right that I and everyone else should leave that process to its course.
Give people a sense of just how precarious things were and the state of the crisis that faced the country at the time that makes these revelations so shocking.
Well, it was a very severe crisis, and of course it was a very severe crisis in many countries, but obviously UK included in that, and we faced some very difficult times. The government of the day and the Bank of England, we at the Bank of England were having to take unprecedentedly difficult decisions in very difficult circumstances. And I worked very closely with them during that time. I worked very closely with Alistair Darling as Chancellor, and I'm absolutely shocked that this was going on because, I have I had the highest respect for Alistair Darling, and I know that he was doing everything that he did with absolutely the best interests of this country at heart, as were other members of the government, and I find it just staggering that this was going on.
Is it your view from what you've seen that he was being actively undermined by a colleague?
Well, I'm going to leave. Let's see what actually emerges. But I know what pressure he was under, what pressure we were all under, but particularly what pressure he was under as Chancellor, the difficulties that he was dealing with, and I find it staggering.
You have other experience of Jeffrey Epstein's orbit. When you were at the Financial Conduct Authority, you took action against Jes Staley, at the time one of Britain's most important bankers, Barclays, and took action that has been seen through. You talked earlier about the lies you were being told. Just give us a sense of the flavour of what those untruths were.
Well, I mean, I don't look. It ended up in a court case. I was a witness in that court case. I think we did all the right things at the FCA, and I think and the court supported what we did in the end. And I felt that it was disturbing and staggering that we had to deal with, frankly, the lies that we had to deal with. But let me reiterate what I said earlier on, because I think this is just the most important point, and I know the Prime Minister said it quite rightly this morning. The most important issue we must not forget about is the victims, the terrible things that were done.
You're vindicated in your approach to this. I wonder if you have any observations for those in Westminster and perhaps beyond who are trying to take action, the sort of action that you led at the FCA against those tainted by association with Jeffrey Epstein.
It really is not for me to comment, say, on anything to do with the politics of it or indeed the investigations of it. I don't think that's appropriate. I'll just reiterate the point I made earlier, because I think it is very important that as a society, all of us, just reflect on how this happened, the terrible things that happened, and the cover-ups that happened, because there are, I think, very important messages for us. And all of us, who are involved in it, we can reflect on it. But I think remembering the victims and reflecting on how this happened is the important thing.
Let's move on to the decisions you've taken today, and the ones that matter to people at home. Frankly, the sort of main question that people ask is, when is my mortgage going to get cheaper? You've used language today that seems quite strong. Rates likely. You've talked about good news. Can you give us any sense of when that good news might turn into another cut?
Well, look, the good news, and it really is good news, is that we now expect inflation to come back to target, and I think in around sometime during the spring of this year, and that is considerably earlier, about a year earlier actually, than we expected if you go back to 3 months ago when we did our previous quarterly report. That's good news. Now, the important thing is not only that happens, but then inflation stays at the 2% target sustainably thereafter, because that's our job and we'll do it. Now, I'm of the view that I'm encouraged by this, but let me say two things. One is, we do need to see. I do need to see more evidence that that part we're on that path and we're going to stay on that path. I don't think we need to see everything fall into place, because the monetary policy has to look forwards. I do think that we have. The second point I'll make is I do think there's some scope for some further reductions, but we obviously are nearing the point where we're going to get to a point where interest rates are at what I might call their neutral setting. And what I mean by that is, if we don't get any more shocks, let's assume that for the moment, because these are things we don't know about now, so then that's the interest rate that will hold inflation at its target sustainably going forwards. Now, we don't know exactly what that level is, because it depends on all sorts of things and the context in which we're operating. But as we reduce interest rates, it's almost a matter of of iron logic that we obviously are getting nearer to that level. So I do think there's some scope for some further reduction, but I would say, as we've said, it's going to get a closer call as we go on, because we are approaching that point.
So another cut perhaps, but the end of this cycle
I'm not going to speculate on, what amount and when. I think there will be some more, and so we will have to judge very carefully how near we're getting to that what I might call neutral setting.
Now, in your job, you're an important person in this, but I can't help but noticing the last two meetings, you have been the casting vote, and you were for a cut last time and for a hold this time. Is ultimately yours is the mind that people need to change?
Well, because actually, by the way, there's no logic in the process by which there's 9 of us, and we each have a vote. But I mean, you're right. Obviously, yes, I did conclude in the December meeting that we knew enough at that point to make that cut. I think what we've seen subsequent to then actually validates that outcome. And again, I'll be constantly looking at, and I said in the comments I made in the minutes myself today, that I'll be going into the next meetings with the question in my mind. I think there is a case for some further easing. Have we reached the point now where that's appropriate?
Finally, you mentioned one of the downward drivers on inflation is measures taken in the budget. 6 cuts already in this cycle.
Yeah.
Another one perhaps coming, as we've discussed. Rates falling, inflation falling. We've been through a pretty gloomy time. Might be some surprises in the British economy to the upside, and that actually we might start to see a little more good cheer.
It's a really interesting question, actually, because it's one of the things that we're looking at quite carefully. We're getting a bit of a mixed picture at the moment. So the surveys, which come in very regularly, which are done of business conditions, are showing a little bit more of a positive signal, I would say. I have to say that our regional agents, who maintain a lot of contacts, are not picking up quite as positive a commentary back from their contacts. But we'll be looking at this so carefully, because as I say, the surveys are beginning to show some signs of a bit of a pickup. So that's obviously something we'll be encouraged by, and I very much hope we will see that, frankly.
Andrew Bailey, thank you very much.
Very good to see you.
And you.